Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can we please settle down? Kevin in the foyer, can you please move people into the auditorium? We're going to start now. 5 minutes. Can I just have, by a show of hands, sorry, Elizabeth. By a show of hands, how many of the chairpersons are here from the roundtables? Can we just see? 1, 2, Vaughan is here. Coogan. 4 hands up. So we've got a couple missing. Eh? No, it's for the roundtables, yeah. So we just got 4, okay.
Listen to me, sister.
Okay.
I keep it oh so low. Yes, I keep it nice and quiet so I can hear you scream. Those words are a wonder. Those are the words, babe, I gotta hear. Oh, yeah. Those words
Closing address. No intervention. No, closing address.
They can
What's it? Not the hour, be less than an hour, but like full podium. Because people are gone, people shift off. No, I didn't say yes. He said, can you talk to him? No. Okay, colleagues, can we close the door on the top there and let's get started? Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon. It's the final session of this conference, which started, as you know, on the 6th on Tuesday. Yesterday we had a phenomenal opening of the conference proper in the address by Professor Judith Brown. And now we're going to have another phenomenal plenary address, and this time to close the conference. And so for closing remarks, I'm going to call Yunus Karim. Now, he's a bit embarrassed about, introducing him and all that. So I'm just going to say, Yunus Karim, Member of Parliament, please come and introduce Comrade Allen.
David, if anybody's interested in me at all, even if they use an old Nokia phone, they can just Google me, right? So, and you can see for what it's worth, what it is I'm supposed to be. But really what matters now is not what's in your CV, it's what you say. And fortunately for me, I ain't going to expose myself because I gather now I'm not a facilitator, I'm merely going to chair. And my job is very easy. So let me say that the foundation and the conference organizers are very pleased to have Reverend Alan Busak here. If it were a South African audience, there wouldn't be much need for me to introduce him. But as it's an international audience, I need to point out that he's a veteran anti-apartheid activist, a church leader, and a liberation theologian. And he previously served as the senior vice president of the South African Council of Churches, and as many of us know, he was president of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. And there's a longer biography of him, but basically he was one of the key activists to stimulate the formation of what came to be known as the United Democratic Front, essentially the internal wing, to put it crudely, of the ANC, and which mobilized thousands upon thousands of people and escalated the struggle significantly. You know, that was in 1983. He's authored 28 books. He has 14 honorary degrees. I was tempted to tell him, but now that's fallen away, that, you know what, I could give him an extra 5 minutes if he could kindly give me one of his many honorary degrees. Because I've been in that infernal parliament, as thou become, for 29 years. And surely somebody should say, hey, Yunus, your staying power alone. Never mind what you do or don't do in parliament. I am, by the way, Alan, somebody pointed out to me, I'm the longest serving non-executive member of that parliament. You know, the 94. No, I'm not looking for. I'm hoping that some university, Martin Prozeski is here, will say, Yunus, you're a useless MP, but that you stayed there for 29 years. Ooh, that's good. You deserve a, and by the way, I used to lecture here in sociology. That's another reason. All right, so hopefully some academic criteria can be infused in what I say, and before I get knocked down by a bus, somebody will say, Yunus, for endurance alone, you deserve an award. Now, let me not take up too much of time, but I want to say finally that, you know what? Oh, yes, of course, this is important. He was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr., especially as we are having the conference, we are International Board of Preachers. Currently, he's a professor of black theology, liberation theology, of course, and ethics at the University of Pretoria. And some of us here, and many, many in the city, remember him very well. David, you know, we were exchanging about this yesterday morning when I raised it. As a speaker who turned up in our city 2 days before the April 27th first ever democratic elections that our foreign visitor know produced the first president of our country, the iconic Nelson Mandela. And he spoke to a packed Lotus Hall. And we anticipated that it'll spill over into the next hall, the joining hall, the Temple Hall. And so we planned it, and I think we certainly had speakers there, but I think we also had a video. Those days we have videos. I think we did have some vision. Speakers, yeah. And he made an electrifying speech, and his voice boomed through the hall, rang out into the street, and into the adjoining Temple Hall. So I don't know why we bothered to put all that sound system and pay for it. We should actually asking for the money back because, you know, he was really electrifying. And he mesmerized that very conservative audience of mostly Indian so-called colored people. And you know, he captivated them. And we had high expectations. But sadly, 48 hours later, that mood didn't linger because most of them didn't vote for the ANC. But mercifully and happily, although they didn't vote for Mandela and the ANC at the time, oh, by the way, Alan Bussack was also, I think, our #1 choice for the Western Cape legislature, and so on. So I don't know what so on means, but there he was, right? And unfortunately, we lost the Western Cape too. But, you know, although they didn't vote for us, they've soon claimed Mandela as theirs too, which is a wonderful thing. So over to Alan, and I have nothing further to do except you'll thank the audience, right? And thank you for staying for so long. I know many people have got transport and other arrangements, but welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much, Yunus. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be here today, to have been with you at the beginning of this conference last Wednesday, and to be with you at the closing of this conference today. And for this closing occasion, I propose that we be guided by some words from that vast treasure of wisdom in the legacies of the persons whose work we have been celebrating all this week long: Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela. And our conference comes at an unprecedented moment in history, I think, a moment when geo-economically and geopolitically the tectonic plates are shifting. All the known paradigms have lost their hold. From the climate emergency to the political crisis that seem to engulf almost every country in the world to the present phase of the never-ending wars that have brought us to the brink of the renewed and entirely possible threat of nuclear destruction. The stakes have never been higher. But for all humankind, it is once again a moment of discernment, of decision, and of commitment, what the Christian scriptures call a moment, a kairos moment, because simultaneously there remains an indestructible spirit of resistance, a revolutionary consciousness, an irrepressible longing for justice and freedom too deeply implanted in the human heart to be ignored or denied or destroyed. All week long, our discussions have centered on this theme, peace and justice for all, mobilizing for nonviolent change. We talk about this not as dreamers with our heads in the clouds, nor as desperados who know that in the face of the overwhelming and seemingly unstoppable violence in the world, we have already lost that battle. But we came together here because we understand that amidst the chaos and the upheaval in our world, this is such a kairos moment. So we are not reminiscing, we are still mobilizing for nonviolent change, for peace and justice for all God's children. We are not here because we are wishful. We are here because we seek to be faithful. At this moment, we are not only commemorating the event that became such a moment of truth for Mahatma Gandhi. We are looking back at interconnected events, different moments, but all inextricably part of that same historical wave of resistance, the same historical claim on freedom and the consequences of that resistance. Just over 100 years ago, we think of the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre of 1921, hundreds of black people murdered by white mobs, the very place that recalled the Trail of Tears for Native Americans. Just over 80 years ago, we saw the Salt March in India, that great historical turning point that showed not only the people of India, but became the inspiration for nonviolent struggle everywhere. It is the 60th anniversary of the Great March on Washington, but also the 60th anniversary of the even greater Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama. It is 60 years ago that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that ringing testimony to the indisputable logic and the rightness and the righteousness and the power of nonviolent resistance contained in his immortal letter from a Birmingham jail. That same jail where he sat alone and at that moment thinking that the cause and he and everybody else for freedom had been utterly abandoned. But King was wrong, however, because that same jail would be filled with wave after wave of children, all of them committed to the cause, all of them standing firm, all of them not just suffering, but singing their way into history. Won't let nobody turn me around. That September of that same year saw the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church, 4 little girls blown to smithereens. The bombing did not wipe out the victories of that year in Birmingham or in Washington, D.C., but it was a reminder of the terror that is always the consequence of our daring to demand our freedom. For South Africa, this year is the 60th anniversary of the start of the Rivonia trial and the beginning of the legend that Nelson Mandela would become. It is 50 years since the students at the University of the Western Cape rose up in resistance for the first time in 1973. The crowd in that walk off from the campus was not so great in number, but the significance of what they did was huge. The students walked off not just in rejection of the apartheid character of that for coloreds only institution. They walked off in solidarity with striking workers in the area. And in so doing, they understood and showed that student politics, that is not embedded in community struggles, in their turn embedded in national struggles for freedom, was actually meaningless. It was, moreover, a resounding triumph for black consciousness and its power in transforming the minds and the lives of South Africa's youth. It signified both the birth of a new era of struggle politics, as well as a surge in revolutionary youth leadership in that struggle. It was also in that year that black consciousness poet, philosopher Adam Small cautioned us that our protest should never be what he called a form of begging. To the young people of that era, Soweto came as no surprise, and neither was the astounding success of the United Democratic Front established this year, now 40 years ago, in 1983. Now, I mention all of this because it helps to emphasize a number of crucial realities. It is a necessary response to what I call the politics of unremembering. And that is a deliberate, actively political process of manipulating, molding, and if necessary, erasing from history facts, events, and perspectives that do not confirm or conform to the dominant narrative justifying patterns of hegemony. It signifies the continuity of struggle as well as the endurance of the spirituality of struggle. It is an intuitive response to Martin Luther King's inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny, as it is a response to Steve Biko's call for selfless revolutionaries. It is that understanding by a younger generation that famous handing over of the baton is not a historical determinant. Neither is it a right. It is a privilege. It is an obligation earned not by standing on the sidelines or cheering from the spectator stands. It is earned by joining the race at one's appointed time, being there on the track with outstretched hand, ready to accept the baton from the one in front who has already run their part of the race. That is how the baton never falls to the ground, and that is how we cross the finish line. There's nothing automatic here, and nothing should be taken for granted here. It is, I think, entirely fair to conclude, without Gandhi, no soul-power-driven mass movement of non-violent militancy, without the children, no March on Washington, no Voting Rights Act, and no Civil Rights Act, without the children of Soweto, no UDF, no Free Mandela, and no defeat for formal apartheid. That is the revolutionary reciprocity that I speak of in the title of this address. And it is so splendidly captured in the words of Martin Luther King, taken from that unforgettable time to break the silence speech in the Riverside Church in 1967, precisely 1 year before his murder. I quote him from that speech. "These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, people are revolting against all systems of exploitation and oppression. And out of the womb of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and the barefoot people of the earth are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We must support those revolutions." I would say he probably would have said, if he knew what was going to happen, we must join those revolutions. Now, as then, these are revolutionary times. Now, as then, these are global struggles. Now, as then, masses of people now led by the youth in just about every instance are rising up against systems of oppression and exploitation. Now, as then, the resistance is being led by the poor and the oppressed, the downtrodden and the disregarded, those of unimpressive proportions, says Latin American theologian Jose Miguel Bonino, those left behind by the oppressive forces and by the revolutionary forces of this world. They are the shirtless and the barefoot, the disempowered, the disinherited, and the dispossessed. These are the people mobilized and mobilizing for justice and peace. They are those who in ever-growing numbers and with ever-increasing power are demanding freedom and justice. They are those who protest, whose protest is not a form of begging. And if the new world that everybody says is emerging, emerges only at the behest of the rich and powerful, and not as a response to the hopes, the demands, and the sacrifices of the poor, the shirtless, and the bare-feet masses, it will be no new world at all. When I read Martin King on the revolution, there are two ways in which I hear and understand him. First, I hear him speak of revolution as does Iranian scholar Hamad Dabashi. Dabashi urges us to think not of revolution in the conventional sense, as we always thought of, say, the French or the Russian revolutions. One historic, cataclysmic, violent moment in which one class overthrows another. He suggests that we think of revolution as more of an unfolding history of struggle, not confined to a single specific moment in history, but with the revolutionary consciousness, the revolutionary expectancy, and the revolutionary readiness of the people. At the heart of it, and in the front lines of it, is not a so-called revolutionary vanguard elite, but at the heart of it is always the people. It is a revolutionary awareness that retains and nurtures and reignites the fires of resistance that have always sustained the people in struggles for freedom and justice. It is an awareness of the continuity of struggle throughout a history of resistance, a revolution sometimes suppressed, sometimes diverted, but never really defocused, what Dabashi calls a temporarily delayed defiance. Never subdued and fed by what black theologian Dwight Hopkins called the interpretive cunning of the poor. It remains an open-ended work of the people, creating new ways to face the ever-changing challenges, multifaceted and definitely adaptable imperialism oppression always brings to us. That connects with the second way in which I read Martin King. A revolution is not real or complete if it is not a revolution of values. It means, amongst other things, that when we speak of power, we have something totally different in mind than the power over others model of our oppressors who know only the power to dominate, to demean, exploit, and to destroy. Our understanding of power is fundamentally different from the power exercised by a criminal, racist, oppressive regime. I have in mind the kind of power in the way that M.M. Thomas of India taught us. Thomas spoke of the revolutions of the 1950s and the 1960s in the Third World as, quote, the demand of the people for power as the bearer of dignity and for significant and responsible participation in society and in social history. That is, Thomas believed, that gave the people a new sense of dignity and of historical mission. And that was what we were after in the struggles I was privileged to be part of, led by the United Democratic Front, a truly people's movement, if ever there was one. And that was what the country would come to see and come to believe in. And that is what Gandhi called soul force. It was a dynamic, completely alien to the stunted, ideologically captured imagination of the apartheid state, and perhaps one of the reasons that made it so hard for that apartheid state to deal with us as a phenomenon. Their brutal power, steeped in white supremacy and capitalist greed, could only conceive of violence. The dynamic that would drive the politics of the UDF was power not for domination, but for the fearless assertion and the determined preservation of the dignity of the people, so that their agency for the shaping of their own history would be awakened and owned. They would be the ones that determined where South Africa's history would go into the future, not those who came from behind and stayed here long after they had overstayed their welcome. It was that giant among intellectuals and activists in the United States, W.E.B. Du Bois, and he would call that the politics of honesty, of integrity, of decency, of courage, and virtue. That is the politics that would stand up to and would resist the politics of vulgarity, of corruption, mendacity, and brutality. Our only hope, Martin Luther King said in that same speech, is to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. This is the politics Mahatma Gandhi had in mind as he embraced the struggle for justice, equity, and dignity. On September 11, 1906, 13 years after that chaotic, revelatory moment on the train station, Mahatma Gandhi spoke at a mass meeting in Johannesburg. There he called for mass non-violent resistance to defy the new racially discriminatory laws of the Transvaal Boer Republic, seeking to deprive Indians of their few remaining citizen rights. Gandhi explained that the call for sustained non-violent action, for boycotts, marches, and other forms of protest actions was his idea. He also said that he had not taken that decision lightly. He was well aware of the risks. He told the crowd this that night: the step was grave and unavoidable. In doing so, they did not hold a threat, but showed that the time for action over above making speeches had arrived. It is quite possible that some of those who pledge ourselves may weaken at the very first trial, for we have to remain hungry and suffer from extreme heat and cold. Hard labor is likely to be imposed upon us in prison. We may even be flogged by the warders. But I ask you to join me in pledging ourselves, knowing full well that we have to suffer things like these. The moment was indeed grave, and so were the risks. There were no guarantees of victory, but the time for talk and making brave speeches was indeed over. The time had come to make hard choices. The threat Gandhi had identified was not a threat that would come from the side of the revolution, but the threat which standing up for freedom always represents to the oppressor classes in any oppressive society. Gandhi knew that the choice to claim freedom would inevitably call forth waves of violence unleashed with a ferocity that only the truly fear-filled can muster. Gandhi understood that not everyone would be ready to make those choices, even that some of us who had pledged themselves would weaken at the first trial. He was completely honest about the dangers ahead and about the inevitability of the oppressor's grim determination not to give up power without a demand from the oppressed. Henry Highland Garnet, that fiery black anti-slavery preacher in the United States, said so in 1843. Frederick Douglass repeated it in 1857. Gandhi knew it and said so in 1906. That wisdom was passed on by Martin Luther King Jr., by Albert John Luthuli, and by Nelson Mandela. And so our generation listened and took heed when it was our turn to take to the streets in the final onslaught against official apartheid. The UDF was formed while the embers of the fires, that was 1976, were still glowing everywhere and turned the country into a furnace of ungovernability, the likes of which we had not seen before. By 1985, the first state of emergency was declared, and by 1987, a second. During that time, 40,000 persons were held in detention without trial, 40% of them children, 10,000 of them women. Our people were killed by the hundreds. Funeral after funeral marked the days of our lives, including the funeral of 27 people massacred in one day in Langa Township outside Uitenhage in the Eastern Cape on March 21, 1985, while they were marching to commemorate the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. Archbishop Tutu and I were the preachers at that day. It was clear to me as I counted those 27 coffins over and over again, a number of them small coffins for the children. It was clear to me what kind of threat we pose to an oppressive government when we decide that our march to freedom would become indeed an unstoppable point in history. So even though our innocence was permanently shattered in 1976, when in the massacre of the children, we saw how far the apartheid regime was actually prepared to go in order to preserve white supremacy. We could not really prepare the youth, 15 and 16 and 17 years old, but in the front lines of the struggle for what was coming. But still, they all took that pledge at the launch of the UDF on the 20th of August in Mitchell's Plain, firmly standing in the tradition Mahatma Gandhi recalled in 1906, knowing full well that we would have to suffer these things. Not for the sake of what, but for the sake of whom. Not for some vague ideological slogan, but for the sake of life for the coming generations. It was a sacrifice of the living for the sake of the freedom of the yet unborn, and for what Biko would pronounce as the greatest gift that we were to bestow upon the world, namely a human face. Recalling the tradition of nonviolence espoused by especially Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and in the ANC of Albert Luthuli, we chose nonviolent militancy as one of the central strategies. The UDF would take nonviolent militancy to such high levels and simultaneously evoke such levels of aggression, oppressive violence, and sheer terror from the state so intense that by the end of the 1980s, that would dwarf the violence unleashed upon the children in 1976. The debate about violence or non-violence that you have been talking about all week here, the efficacy, the practicality, and the morality of each, never far from our minds, was reignited, and it would remain a vexed and a complex issue. Once again, our people in another generation were placed before life and death choices. When Martin King spoke of the spiritual power of nonviolence, we recall Chief Albert Luthuli, who reminded us of the seductive power of violence. Luthuli warned that if we, under pressure of the violence and the intransigence of the oppressor, also chose the road to violence, we would be in the process facing the risk of becoming more and more like the oppressor, who would draw us into his evil cycle of thinking. He was right. Nothing would make that destructive becoming clearer than our own South African version of the Americans' lynching, the necklace. We remembered then that Luthuli told us that we should not succumb to the oppressor's invitation to join his desperation. For him, violence was a powerful seduction, whose lure we should resist as much as humanly possible. He prayed that through all the temptations, our soul would remain intact. And so he pleaded with us not to easily give up the militant, non-violent struggle. So even when under severe pressure from his own movement, and from no less a charismatic, courageous, and brave leader of the younger generation, Nelson Mandela, Luthuli nonetheless insisted that the oppressor's incessant violence was, I quote, vainglorious, and that our imitating that oppressor would be equally vainglorious. And that should not be the way for us, he says. And so leaning upon the wisdom of Albert Luthuli, it was possible for a new generation after a decade of quiet despair, even while respectfully understanding the choices Nelson Mandela and his generation had to make in their time, to return to those methods in the 1970s and the 1980s and build a movement of militant, nonviolent resistance that would ultimately break the back of official apartheid. Never losing sight of the agonizing circumstances that forced our elders to make that decision, and never losing our respect for them and their reasons for making those agonizing choices. We never passed judgment. Like Luthuli, we understood that the stakes were high and the possibilities and the pressures almost unbearable. Nonetheless, we would define and defend our own choice for our choices that we make. I readily concede that this view is and has always been a point of serious contestation among those engaged in struggles for freedom. Even as we meet here in this week, African Americans are being slaughtered by police and security forces and vigilantes in a veritable homicidal frenzy, as if a new, brazen, and terrorizing display of their power and impunity has suddenly become a new necessity. And so perhaps it has, as it always is, for any empire crumbling and dying under the weight of its own violence, its own hubris, and under God's judgment. There, too, the debate has been reignited. In all these situations, we have found one must respectfully weigh in at least 4 questions. One of morality, of inevitability, of positivity, and responsibility. I don't have time to go into all of that. If you want to see the argument to that, go read the book that I published just the other day entitled Selfless Revolutionaries. Excuse me, Chairperson, for the little commercial in between. Violence from the side of the oppressed is always counter-violence. As we have learned from Albert Luthuli, the moral question is not really why the oppressed are engaging in violence. The question really is, who is responsible for the causes of the violence? And who is it that made nonviolent change impossible? It was only when all else failed, Nelson Mandela reminded the court at his trial, when all channels of peaceful protest were barred to us, that the decision was taken to embark on violent forms of political struggle. We did so, not because we desired such a course, but solely because the government had left us with no other choice, end quote. Albert Luthuli, in remaining steadfast in his own choice for militant, non-violent resistance, nonetheless spoke of Mandela and the others as embodying, quote, the highest morality and ethics. The apartheid regime and its beneficiaries have put, he said, the highest morality and ethics in the liberation struggle in prison, where it might not survive. Lutuli was not referring to the decision by Mandela and the ANC to ultimately turn to violence as a strategy. He was referring to those high and impeccable moral standards embodied by Mandela and the others, in fact, by the oppressed people of South Africa as a whole for so long. That morality that against all odds and in the face of the severest provocations has kept the struggle nonviolent for so long, and that has honored the noblest goals of the struggle for decades in the face of the immorality of unspeakable oppressions. It was those high moral standards, clung to so tenaciously, which were now punished with imprisonment where they might not survive. And of course, they did not survive. Where would South Africa go then? Most importantly, however, this was a question that really can only be asked by the oppressed themselves. Those who drive and maintain and benefit from oppression dare not even raise the question of violence and non-violence. It simultaneously answers the inevitable question. Over and over, Martin Luther King reminded Americans of the word of John F. Kennedy. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. So in making our own choices in this regard, we made no judgment, but rather we allowed our experiences of these freedom fighters to haunt our minds. And this would remain a seriously debated question, however, and everyone would know that not all would be persuaded. Nonetheless, we believed our choice in this was the right one. This is what my own thinking is on the question of violence and non-violence. And I've tried to hold on to that even in the most difficult moments. Violence, I argued, has an awesome irreversibility. It destroys the chances of genuine peace and reconciliation in the irredeemable destruction and irreversible destruction of the other. It casts the other in the mold of an unchangeable, incontrovertible enemy. It systematizes as well as depersonalizes the other as the eternal enemy. After the violent blow is struck, there are no more options left, and the last word is already drowned in blood. Violence takes on a life of its own. It feeds on human emotions far stronger than we realize. It releases a relentless and deadly dynamic we are first not prone and then not able to stop. It sweeps reason and better judgment aside, as in a ritualistic helplessness not acknowledgeable to ourselves sometimes, we respond to the call of blood to blood. Lifting the sword does indeed destroy the soul. Nonviolence appeals to something deep and irrepressible within ourselves, to the truth that we know about ourselves as well as the other, that too often we deny this, that in our creaturely relational existence, in our common humanity, we are created to affirm and choose and celebrate life rather than death. It affirms the humble acknowledgement of the possibility that we might find out in the end that we might be wrong, that the other may be redeemable. Nonviolent militancy does not deny the existence of evil, and neither does it try to trivialize it. It purposefully seeks to open up possibilities for our creativity in resisting and confronting and overcoming evil. It opens the way for the choosing of another path, to the Ubuntuification of the other, because it longs for the affirmation of our humanity in the redeemed humanity of the other. Violence, in its irreversibility, is a reach too far for mortals such as us. Nonviolence acknowledges the existence of holy ground, such as taking the life of another, and that we must think twice before we dare to tread upon it. Story of the prophet Elijah in the Hebrew Bible is sometimes not without reason overwhelmed by the one event that seems to mark his life, and that is the slaughter of the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. There's one point that I would like, recalling the story, to highlight at this moment. The Hebrew Bible scholar Mordecai Kogan writes this: with the people's help, the prophet Elijah personally carried out the purge of the Baal prophets, not on the mountain itself, but down at the Wadi Kishon. Now, the Wadi Kishon was a distance away. That means that Elijah had the Baal prophets corralled, and he had the people herd them down the mountain to the Wadi. It was therefore a very deliberate and a very different kind of mobilization than the mobilization you have been talking about all week. Kogan quotes the late medieval Jewish philosopher Gesonides, who writes this: the site down at the Wadi was chosen so that the blood would not pollute the land, and on this account it was spilled into the Wadi so that the water would carry it far off. This is a point I invite us to ponder for just a moment. Elijah and the people actually thought that the water in the Wadi would wash the blood from the ground and from their hands and from their soul. That, however, is an illusion. And that it is an illusion, we can see it from that same holy land where Palestinian blood is being spilled every day for the last 75 years since the Nakba, to yet another manifestation of the forever wars now engulfing even Sudan, from the Congo to the killing fields of Ukraine. Day by day, moment by bloody moment, come the lessons we seem always to refuse to learn. The most enduring myth about violence is not that it is controllable, but that it is redemptive. The most sinful reality of violence is not that it begets violence, but that it is idolatrous. The tragic deceitfulness about violence is not that it is toxic, but that it is intoxicating. The most devastating truth about violence is not its horrors, but its delusions. I draw your attention to one more quotation from Nelson Mandela from 1994, who said, the truth is that we are not yet free. We have merely achieved the freedom to be free, the right not to be oppressed. We have not taken the final step of our journey, but the first step on a longer and even more difficult road. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's own chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning. Mandela did not know how these words would become 10 years after his death, and 30 years into the democracy he had invested so much in, and how much his own organization would not heed this word. From there was a time in South Africa 40 years ago when faith communities and educational institutions, universities and high school students and lecturers, workers and the unemployed, people from all walks of life, from across the artificial barriers of skin color and race and class and culture and religion and language, did come together, did mobilize on a scale that we have not yet seen before. We saw the world of apartheid through the eyes of those who suffered, and we rose up in resistance. Our protest was relentless and purposeful, and not in any way, as Adam Small had warned us, a form of begging. We faced tear gas and dogs and guns. We were imprisoned and beaten and tortured. We lived lives of self-sacrifice. We lived in selfless, revolutionary reciprocity. We felt the pain of our people. We shared their dreams of freedom through their eyes. We saw visions of justice and equity. We were not content to live in an unjust world. We knew we were not a people meant for oppression and tyranny and destruction. Mandela in prison could not see it. Mahatma Gandhi and Albert Luthuli and Martin Luther King, no longer with us, could not see it. But their spirit lived in us. It lifted us up and it vaulted us forward. But that, my brothers and sisters, was before the days of euphoria and illusion. Before we told ourselves that a negotiated settlement signified the coming of the reign of God. Before we decided that honoring our people's sacrifices was too much of a burden to bear, too much of a hindrance to the profitable deals made with the old white apartheid capitalist classes. Before we were so mesmerized by the wizardry of mammon and the intoxication of power that we forgot the subversive memories of struggle and of our faith. That was before we began to use parliamentary privilege to disguise crimes, and before we left the battlefields of justice to hide ourselves in the drafty caves of kleptocracy, self-aggrandizement, and instant gratification. It is no wonder we ended up where we are today as a country and as a people. We are a people severely diminished by politics without principles, leadership without vision, policies without commitment, and hence by failure after failure. We are drowning in corruption and lies and cover-ups. We are plagued by deceit and confounded by subterfuge. Our disastrous choices in economic policies have deepened the generational impoverishment of our people while creating new millionaires from one crooked deal after the other every second week, it seems, making us the most unequal society in the world today. Steve Biko's fear expressed way back in 1970 that if we only strive to get a black face in high office and nothing fundamentally changes, especially our economic system, South Africa would exactly, he said, be like yesterday. And that is the return of unfreedom. It's the return of submission to oppression and authoritarianism, which is enslavement. It is by the same token the ongoing impoverishment of the vast majority of our people, the ongoing colonization of our mind, of our land, not to say nothing about the recolonization of our mind. So where do we go from here? Our country racked by revived racism, re-invited colonialism, re-embraced tribalisms of every sort, reinvented ethnic nationalism on the rampage. Our people, as far as I hear, have lost trust in just about every democratic institution we have, from Parliament to the courts. And even as we speak, Parliament seems paralyzed by an inability or an unwillingness or political carelessness beyond belief to hold anyone to account. When they do that, they spit on the sacrifices of our people. Perhaps Nelson Mandela, when he addressed the COSATU conference in 1993, had known more than we understood, and found out only in the years following how much the ANC he had loved and worked and lived and sacrificed for was not the ANC that returned to govern. Hence his words at that conference, and this is what he said: if the ANC government ever does to you what the apartheid government has done to you, then you must do to the ANC government what you have done to the apartheid government, end quote. And these are the words this generation are now calling to mind, if not yet taking it to heart. On March 21 this year, I was asked by the youth of the Uniting Presbyterian Church in Southern Africa to be a speaker at their virtual conference on what they called the plight of our democracy. I was asked to speak on the subject, what have we lost? It was a riveting 2-hour session of exchanges with those young people. And I said some of what I think we had lost. We had lost, I thought, an opportunity to let South Africa's oppressed people see and enjoy the fruits of their struggles. We had lost the opportunity to give young people confidence in the belief that they have a future worth fighting for and investing in, that this is how we honor the sacrifices of their parents and their grandparents. We have lost the opportunity to show them that it is not inevitable that such great hopes for the future, such legitimate expectations would be replaced by such deep anger, disappointment, and disillusionment. We had lost the opportunity to show white South Africans what true, inclusive, non-racial, egalitarian democracy is all about. And in the process to allow our white brothers and sisters to live with the peace they had never known, because apartheid, racism, white supremacy, and exploitations do not allow for peace of mind for those who perpetrate it. We lost the opportunity to show the world that Ubuntu is not some empty, idle African philosophical utopia, but a lived reality with the ability to restore our humanity. It is still possible to retrieve what we lost, but it will call for renewed struggle. Indeed, the true test of our devotion to freedom has just begun. Does that mean, however, that we have lost all, that we, with all that is going on, all that makes us so angry and so despondent and sometimes so hopeless, must abandon all hope, that we must walk away from the struggle, that we must turn our backs on the future and leave life at the mercy of the powers of evil, and with that leave our children to their mercy? Once more, Gandhi in 1906. The struggle will be prolonged, but provided that the entire community bravely stands the test, there can only be one end to the struggle, and that is victory. Once more, Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, this is a fire no water can put out. There is no stopping point short of victory. And from India, a new, younger voice, the author and activist Arundhati Roy. We have, she says, each in our own way, laid siege to empire. We may not have stopped it in its tracks yet, but we have stripped it down. We have made it drop its mask. We have forced it into the open. It now stands before us on the world stage in all its brutish, iniquitous nakedness, too ugly to behold its own reflection. Arundhati Roy is right. Martin Luther King is right. Gandhi is right. Mandela was right. It is not yet the end, but this is a victory we should celebrate. This is one more reason why giving up now is not an option. One more reason why that march is still going on. One more reason why we should join that march today, now. One bold, faithful, hopeful step at a time, because there is no stopping this short of victory. Thank you. God bless you all.
Come on, I think we can do better than that. Come on. That was a wonderful, wonderful way to end this conference. Thank you so much. You may be seated. These papers and these presentations will be available. I think especially the keynote addresses especially that we've had so far have been very, very telling. So I think that the organizers will be able to put all of that together All of the speeches in the roundtables will also be made available, as well as the abstracts that have been written by the various people. And I've been told by Professor Smith to indicate that post the conference, if each of you could just complete your papers in the manner in which you want it published, then and submit that to us, it will be published by the end of this year in a book form, in a journal form, so that this conference then will go down in history, at least as a documented kind of thing. Colleagues, we're at the end of the conference, and this is a telling time now because we've had all of these stirring speeches and debates and so on, and now we need to walk away from here with at least a plan. I'm not saying how that should actually happen. I'm just saying that as one of the organizers of this conference, we dare not walk away saying what a wonderful 3 days or 4 days of discussion, but nothing actually happens on the ground. And so it's my pleasure now to call Professor Nombuhle Indimani Shlongwa to come forward. She's going to lead the facilitation for these roundtable reports, and I believe that there are chairpersons here that are going to come forward and just give us just a sense of what their roundtable was doing and saying, and then maybe a resolution from each of those, and then we can consider it. We're going to ask Nombuhle for you to be assisted by, there's Dr. Johnny Mack that is here, Jannie Smith is at home, Claiborne Carson is here, Alan Busak is here, Judith Brown is here. We're asking each of those persons to please assist in formulating a way forward for us before we leave here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think at this time we need to give David a big round of applause. He has been doing a sterling job. Thank you very much, David. Thank you so much. And to all our keynote speakers, another big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, without taking a lot of your time, as we are about to close the conference, may I invite all the chairs of all the roundtables to please come down so that they come and sit here, please, all the chairs. Please. I'm not going to call the names. All the chairs, they know their names. I'm not going to call them. We had about 6 roundtables, so I don't know how many are here. Please, if you could come down. If the chairs are not enough, maybe some of the colleagues may sit up in front here if the chairs are not enough. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, when we opened the conference, we did indicate that this is a very important conference and it seeks to recognize the worldwide iconic status of our 3 leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, Martin Luther King. We are bringing these leaders in front of you into an interdisciplinary intellectual space in which their legacy can be analyzed and interpreted for the world today. So with all the presentations that we have heard from yesterday and also during the youth symposium as well, they talk to the work that these 3 icons have done. So central aspect of the values of the 3 leaders is that they espouse where the struggles for non-racial, equal recognition, freedom, social justice, economic equity, and the franchise. So at this time, maybe so that it is easy for me, I'm not gonna call like Roundtable 1, Roundtable 2, but I'm gonna begin on my side with my professor from this side, and then we're gonna go that way and invite the contributions from Professor Moyo, and there will be a roving mic. Tintin will be assisting with the roving mic so that our chairs are able to contribute. So let me invite Prof. Moyo to begin. Prof, I hope that is fine with you. Thank you very much. Yes. The chair is here. Please come. Thank you very much. Prof, over to you, and then I'll come back to the chair of the Youth Symposium.
Oh,
You
I
can
thought I
begin.
was switching now because there's someone on my side. Thank you, Program Director. I was just facilitating the process. I'll just pick up what I heard coming from the different 6 speakers. But centrally, the round table was around issues of sustainable self-rule, governance, and development. And we're looking at Gandhi, Luther, and Mandela from that perspective. And I think there were about 4 things that came out strongly. I will mention only that. The first area was issues of gender, where the presenters were looking at gender or women, culture, health and governance in Africa. And I think what came out strongly was that health service providers should be considerate of the cultural mindsets of Africans. If they are to offer services, they should understand the worldview of the African. As in most cases, hospitals and clinics are sort of divorced from cultural, indigenous healing practices that people actually are using. And government has got spaces for that. However, when in hospital, indigenous healers are not actually allowed to participate in the healing process. So the cry was that there should be room for that in governance, in respecting the African. There was also an interesting talk about, is Swadesh a thermodynamic concept? And what I heard strongly is that there is need for an equilibrium. There is need for a balance in terms of resources. So if resources are concentrated in one place, there will be a push and pull towards where there is less resources. So there is need for us to fight for a balance. I think it's an issue of riches being concentrated in the hands of a few.
You can summarize, Prof, in one sentence now, please.
Yes, in one sentence, I would say that what came out strongly was that there's been too much talk about Gandhi, Mandela, and King, but there is less practice that is visible in governance. Governance is too capitalistic rather than having that ethic of being social.
Thank you very much, Prof. Moyo. May I now come front and get to the resolution from the Youth Symposium? Over to you, my brother.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Program Director and respected chairs from the various sessions. I was not the chairperson for the Youth Symposium. It was Mr. Denzel Shetty. I was one of the keynote speakers, but I have the privilege of presenting to you the certain key recommendations that emerged out of the 6 panels that happened. And again, all due credit to all the speakers who contributed those points. So I think the first focus area and the most important one that I saw was education. And there was a strong call for decolonization of the education system. Along with that decolonization, the need for creating curriculum which sort of is aligned with that decolonization process, the need for upskilling of young people, and for using education as a strong tool for social justice. So that was one key point that many young people throughout had raised. I think the other one was the need for intergenerational conversations. So the idea is that while youth needs to come and lead, there is a strong need for intergenerational cooperation and intergenerational engagement in creating a more cohesive future as we move ahead. A couple of other pointers. Yes, it was also emphasized by many speakers that structural violence needs to be focused on, and not just the symptoms of violence that we see. So many solutions need to be on that front. Key focus other than that was on gender rights, so ensuring rights for various communities, but more specifically girls and women as well. So there was a very strong call for action around providing gender rights. Climate change was also recognized as a key issue that needs to be dealt with while we address the issue of violence, specifically the communities which are more vulnerable to climate change, because not everyone's affected by the climate change in the same way. And I think I'll just conclude with the last point.
Yes, please.
It's a big resolution that they managed to formulate. Is that while we idolize the big actions, the bigger picture through these big leaders, it was also emphasized that the importance of smaller actions in our day-to-day lives, in our behaviors, specifically youth and adults all, was also highlighted by the young people. So just credit to all the speakers once again. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those key points. May I now invite our next chair, Prof. Wheeler, to share the key points and some of the resolutions from that roundtable. Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you very much. Our group was Roundtable 3, which was looking at women health and equity in governance and economic education. The first point that we raised was that the issue of women health and governance is a human rights issue, and it's a serious issue that embraces all facets of life in women's lives, all facets of life in women, and we also looked at it in beyond just being under governance and education, but also going into issues of their contexts, be it cultural context, social context, ethnicity, identity, and the like. So some of the points that we raised then specifically were that now that we have borrowed a leaf from the giants that we have looked at, what next? So the group argued that there's need to go forward and look at the issues that have been raised from a more contextual approach than always going back to history. So we would say then, what does Gandhi and King and Mandela's legacy, what does it do to women today, and what does it mean to a woman in their different contexts? The second point was that we asked ourselves how we can respond to the critical thinking of these legends as scholars in our own social occasions, because the main argument was that context is contested and spaces are contested. So there was need also to be very specific that we come from different contexts, so we could not group issues of gender-based violence or women's issues about health in one box. There was also the third point on looking at gender-based violence as a pandemic. And so the question was raised, can bodies such as United Nations be viewed as catalysts to address issues of gender-based violence and women's health? The fourth point was also to call for a need to promote social campaigns that address issues of gender-based violence through social media. We had a very long debate on the issue of social media, arguing that it seems as though the paradigm of women's subjection has moved into the social media, and we did not see much of that in the conference. The last point was actually more of a suggestion from the group that now that we've talked about these legends, where are their spouses? So there was a suggestion made by the group that in the near future, perhaps there'll be need to actually have a slot like the one that we had, which talks about women, it having to address the spouses of these three legends so that they demonstrate their value, especially the family life values.
Thank you very much, Professor Willa. I think Dr. Elizabeth Williams have begun that discussion. I think in her keynote, she has already asked that question. Where are the women who were key to the lives of these three icons? Thank you very much, Professor Willa. Dr. Ganda, Dr. Ella Ganda, please, over to you.
Thank you. I chaired the session on media and communication, and some of the issues that were raised there is that all three icons used the media to mobilize, educate, inform the community. And that media played a very powerful role in promoting the movements that were started by the three icons. In relation to that, we also didn't have much time for discussion. So we agreed at the end of the session that all the papers that were presented, they were powerful papers on how the media was used in the past by all three icons. They were, in promoting satyagraha, how during Nelson Mandela's time, the different organizations, the SACP, the ANC, had their media and how they used that. And similarly with the civil rights movement, media played a big role. So what we felt is that we take all those papers and we will circulate it to the people that attended that particular session, and that we will have a Zoom conference after that in order to discuss further where do we take this initiative. But in the meantime, there are two things that have come out. Dr. Pathak has offered to, at least for 1 year, to continue with the Indian Opinion, which was started by Mahatma Gandhi. It was the first newspaper, and it was started here in South Africa. The name, according to the papers that were presented, we found that the name Indian Opinion came from the name that Dr. Jabavu had started his newspaper with, Imvo Zabantu Sundu. I think that's the name of that paper. And translated, it means African Opinion. And so this was Indian Opinion. It was published in 4 languages, in the Tamil, Hindi, Gujarati, and English. And it published, from each other's publications. So somehow Gandhiji, did see the other newspapers, and then there was Ilangalasi Natal that was published by Dr. Dubé. And they shared stories and so on. So we felt that we can promote this legacy, but maybe we would give it another title, maybe Satyagraha, which was started in 2002. And we could give that name to the newspaper, because at the present moment, Indian Opinion is not shouldn't be the title of the newspaper that we're going to, start now. It'll be a continuation, but not necessarily the same name. So that is going to happen, and we are going to discuss, further a small committee which will take this further. One of the important things that came out of that discussion was that these newspapers, the resistance newspapers, and although now it's not a question of resisting, but it's a question of ensuring that corruption doesn't take place, ensuring that services are delivered to the community and so on. And also taking the message of these three icons and other icons as well to the community. So informing and educating the community on what is happening, what are some of the important thoughts and so on. So with that in mind, what had come out is that these newspapers are not produced in an office with Google or something like that. People have to go into the community, and you mobilize the community and get the news, community news, and get them to write the stories, and then we help them to put the stories into the newspaper. And in that way, you know that you've got the interest of the people own the newspaper, and they also help to distribute the newspaper.
That is
so
fantastic.
It means organizing and mobilizing the community. It means, ensuring that people write the stories and then produce that newspaper. So these are some of the initial steps that we will take in the next few days. And included in that is the Zoom conference with that group. Dr. Chetty, who was facilitating or who had helped in that group, has got a list of the names and email addresses. If there are other people in the audience who are interested in media work, and this can be done all over the world. It doesn't have to be done in South Africa. You form a little collective in your area and produce this, and electronically we can send you the newspaper, and then you can distribute in your area.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that is fantastic.
The names and email addresses.
I think the names of the presenters, I think they will be in the program, but I think the resolution, I think they are hearing the resolution right now. We'll be getting the names of the people, I think maybe at the end of the session. Thank you very much for the fantastic resolutions. Professor?
Thanks so much, Prof. Longwa. So I had the pleasure of chairing at the Youth Symposium, the Education and Justice Roundtable. And then in the main conference, we chaired the teaching and learning about Gandhi, Mandela, and King. And there was a clear articulation from the Youth Symposium all the way through to the main symposium that our current education system worldwide needs to be liberated. And the young people in the Youth Symposium really call for the liberation. And in essence, they basically took leadership in this particular area. And what came out in terms of a summary was that the current education system, be it the basic education system as we refer to it in South Africa, and the higher education systems, really lead to a negative learning environment that negates, justice. And what this leads to is conformity, and it does lead to a lack of creativity that is really required for any fight against violence and injustice. And many of the presenters went back to Mandela's principle of education being the best weapon against violence and injustice. And they used that as the basis for looking for the overhaul. And there was a proposal for an actionable education, one that brings about, okay, an inclusion of a syllabus or curriculum that introduces a pedagogy and a methodology around peace, nonviolence, and social skills. And we had two classic examples of a schooling system where peace learning circles were used as a method or an approach to actually educate youngsters about peace and nonviolence. We also had very interesting presentations around an initiative of the American Freedom Libraries in the South, and Mike is not here now. He's authored a book on that, and it's really about access to knowledge for the marginalized and the role that those libraries play in the education system. So the key observations really are around what we are doing with our syllabus and what we are doing with our curriculum. Now, Kavesh already spoke about transforming and decolonizing the curriculum. And some key areas around where the focus should be is that it's clear that the icons somehow are neglected, right? They're forgotten about in that syllabus. But with it is also not just instilling content, but also the exposure to peace and conflict transformation studies throughout the education systems, as well as leadership skills, as well as the exposure, and Vern spoke about it this morning, to within a framework of ethical behavior, the value and the importance, okay, of morals within the system, and also what do we define as acceptable social behavior, together with making sure, even at the higher education level, with our graduate attribute frameworks, that the soft skills are also a core focus. Unfortunately, we tend to, in higher education, we focus on just the subject content without looking at what is required to have a world, okay, where we can have peace agents. So those skills, those soft skills, those graduate attributes that are required for community and nation building are crucial. And then finally, what we also we proposed was the development of a network. And I did put out a call when I did the welcoming speech in terms of developing a network of anybody who's interested in teaching and learning to come forward. You do not need to be an academic, you do not need to be a teacher. You just need to be passionate about education, wherever you are, even if you're a practitioner. What we're looking to do is develop that network from here on out, as well as a community of practice going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoskins. I think that community of practice is going to be very, very relevant to addressing the transformation that we want in our curriculum. Thank you very much. Kugan, over to you.
Thanks, Program Director. I thought I'll sit next to the good professor here and I'll peep at the notes and get some answers, but it didn't help. Sorry about it. So I chaired the one on revolution of values and practical implementation. And as I've mentioned, we've had a summary framework of an abstract which covered two main themes, which are at the center of not achieving peace and justice. The number one was racism and economic exclusion, and the second one was corruption and the impact of values. So on the first one, based on the discussions you've heard, as the Deputy Minister confirmed, there's a draft form of the hate crimes bill before Parliament at the moment, and he's also mentioned about the National Action Plan. And these have been sitting for some years in Parliament, and I think we'd like to take it forward in terms of implementation and finding out what are the blockages and how does it relate to people or society for that matter who are being prejudiced by lack of policy reforms. And under that was also economic exclusion. As early as 20 years ago, Bishop Tutu spoke about economic reforms and a new economic system, and that came through as well at the Mandela lecture. And yet, 20 years later, we are much more unequal, poorer as a society, and violent and not at peace. So that was the first one. Under the second one on values and principles, which is at the heart of fighting corruption. So the points we've got there is, how do we implement the values and principles? And that is at the center of Professor Fikeni's mandate. So we'll work closely with Professor Fikeni and the Public Service Commission on
Kugan, you have 2 minutes to leave the building. So maybe in 1 minute you can sum up, and
Lovely.
then they are already waiting for you outside.
Oh. All right. So at the center of that is implementing the values and principles towards a values-based leadership. And in that regard, we'll look at standards of GMK, Gandhi, Mandela, King, so that we can institutionalize good governance and we can achieve. I mean, we've been told we've got the best constitution, yet it does not make sense 30 years later we are not at peace with each other. So we need to then achieve the goals of the National Development Plan, the goals of the UN, the SDGs, and how do we do this? A M&E plan, monitoring and evaluation plan, a kind of a steering committee coming out of this meeting, and also engaging with the member body to see who would be keen in this task team, to look at strategic partnerships. We've got various strategic partners here, the World House Project, that Johnny and Professor Carson leads in Stanford and others. And then in terms of the formalities, David has spoken about the abstract already, and the full paper, we can gauge from him what are the timelines we're looking at, put in a steering committee, and put in an M&E plan to measure and monitor what we achieve from now till next year, so that when we come next year, we can talk about how far we've moved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Kugan. My sister, yes, please, we will release you. Safe travels. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Over to
Chair.
my sister.
My name is Tandi Gumbi. I was co-chairing with Prof. John. I will just share one theme, and then he'll share the next and the resolutions. Our Roundtable 5 focused on how to understand and intervene in world and regional conflicts through nonviolence. And one theme that was common throughout was education and awareness, which Prof. Hoskins has portrayed well. And these several presentations that were presented in our roundtable were, they all touched upon the role of education and increased awareness in promoting nonviolence, conflict resolution, and social transformation. So this was whether it was through peace programs like the Alternatives to Violence Project, or the educational role of music, in particular reggae music, or the importance of understanding the role of media or mass media in conflict. And so the presentations underscored the power of education as a tool for change. I'll hand over to Prof. John.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Prof. John. Thank you very much, Tandi.
Thank you. Just to add 2 other themes that emerged in Roundtable 5 that Tandi and I were part of. Integral to our discussion was the building of grassroots movements and change from below, echoing the bottom-up approaches championed by Gandhi, King, and Mandela. The Roundtable emphasized the power of individual and community-level actions in driving broader social transformation. And I think this reinforces and resonated with a lot of the keynote speakers and comments from the audience, particularly today, about that, and including indigenous knowledge as well. The second theme I would comment on that I think was noteworthy in that roundtable was the discussions of love and interconnectedness, which also surfaced in several presentations. And this again resonated with several points made by keynote presentations. And I think it speaks to the importance of humanizing the process of conflict transformation and change. And we also had one actionable item, and that was really that those of us who've made connections with others at the conference and have identified areas of common work or interest could start quite immediately in working together and perhaps building networks, and over time those networks could well become, kind of movements across several spaces, as we've seen with others. So I think I would endorse the comment made by Dr. Gandhi about the conference organizers making the participants' contact details available to all of us, so we can facilitate that contact and networking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you so much. May I move to Professor Beatrice Kiramano? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much. I think just like most of the roundtables, we had little time to discuss, really. But a few issues that came out, I think one of them is the whole violence against the environment. It came out strongly that if we are looking at issues of non-violence, then we need to also look at our environment as well. And also the whole issue of building equal human dignity. And this also came out strongly in most of the presentations, and we felt that there has to be a call for education and dialogue with a view of empowering people, for people to know that non-violence is superior to violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our chairs of our different roundtables. I just want to make one comment. In one of the roundtables I attended, there was one resolution which was made by one of the speakers. We have indicated the issue of inequality in South Africa. The issue of recognizing traditional healing methods. Currently, our public hospitals cater for the biomedical treatment and all of that. Go to the markets and see how our African people are selling their medicine. It is not good. We want government to assist the traditional healers so that the traditional healing methods could also be recognized in the same way as the biomedical. That's very, very urgent, and it's something that can be done with the assistance and collaboration from government. So with just that one contribution, may I invite our keynote to also maybe add to some of the resolutions. I know you have spoken a lot in your presentations, but like maybe one key point that we can take as part and parcel of our resolution. I will start from Dr. Busak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These are all extremely valuable points, and I hope we find ways of following up. The two things that I would like to say, that out of this conference there would indeed be formed, as was suggested, a kind of an ongoing committee that would continue to think about these things, continue to gather ideas, because as people leave here and as they have conversations with others, new ideas will come up, so that we continue to keep each other in conversation, but we bring this conference in a broader conversation with the communities where we are going to. That's number one. Number two, if we are going to think of this this new form of taking responsibility. There's a reason why I quoted M.M. Thomas 3 times in that paper, because I think the idea of people understanding that they have power which is legitimate. Now in this situation, I think we have completely given up our power. Thinking that other people that we have elected have all the power, forgetting that people who are in government positions now have only power because that is power entrusted to them. Now, we have to, in some way or another, find ways of connecting with communities in these new organizations that we follow, encourage organic leadership from those communities like we used to, so that they set up their own priorities, but that their priorities in their communities converge with the national priorities and with this conference with international priorities. Because ultimately the struggles that we are talking about, they are all global struggles. And that connectivity that Martin King understood so well, that is what we should be looking at in a new way right now. So I think that is important. And there needs to be a vehicle to make sure that these things are actually followed up on.
Thank you so much, Professor Bosak. Professor Kasson?
Well, the things that I would recommend would be using our platform, the World House Project, as a platform for anything you want to do. Because to me, our major themes are education, and all of you are involved in education, and networking, and all of you should be networked. So I look upon us as working together, particularly in these areas where you already have the network, we offer the platform. And you can use it for whatever purpose you want to use it for. We already have a way of disseminating education. We call it the Liberation Curriculum. And that's been going on for about 10 years now. And I think that that's another forum where anything you want to see as far as education, please use us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. We will definitely be using you, and we have already started networking with the team that you came up with. So thank you very much for bringing them on board with you. David, are you going to comment as well? Okay. Over to you, Prof. Mac.
Yes, thank you. I would second Dr. Carson's sentiments. And I think that we should think very carefully about durability and sustainability. Much of what we've said, of course, we must do. The question is, how will we ensure our relevance and longevity, and have the kind of impact that we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So having all of these ideas are fantastic, but as Dr. Carson has indicated, if we don't have a platform and we don't have a framework for durability and sustainability, and we're not clear on what our outputs and outcomes are, then I think we have less of a chance to ensure those very things. So that would be my comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. I think most of the contributors are either coming from organizations or from the institutions of higher learning, and institutions of higher learning have a responsibility for community engagement. And many universities across the globe, or maybe more in South Africa, they haven't been doing justice to that. So that is the narrative that we need to change.
May I offer one other really quick note, and it's about the bottom-up strategy and the role of civil society, something that we discussed here, but I don't think we have sufficiently emphasized.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Santi. Over to you, Prof.
Oh, me?
Yes, please.
Oh, my goodness. I'm an academician, but in ophthalmology. I can offer sight improvement, some vision skills. So here, when I thought about participating in conducting this meeting, my thought process is, as I keep saying, my reference point is Mahatma Gandhi. And the reference point has been, he has used two different time periods. In 1930 April, when he did the Salt March, he talked about right over might. That means the colonization denied many rights to lower strata of people. And that could be changed after India's independence. Many countries who are colonized got independence. Now we have some rights, except the later rights that came in USA through Martin Luther King Jr. Now the society is changing towards greed. I think this was discussed already. We have 4 trillionaires, and there's a 5th in making. And again, 95% of the wealth is in the 5 companies, while the rest of the people can't even make a decision. They don't have a right to make a decision how that money should be spent, because it's not government-based, and these people don't have any control on it, only just to consume. So, as some person said, Gandhiji's statement is, we have enough resources for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. Now we have to change that culture. Where, at what stage can we change the culture? I see already across the globe, those who enter the college are already greed-centered, sorry to say, 95%. How do I make a fast buck? How do I advance myself in the wealth status? How do I go about it? So we need to change that to need-based. And that's my intent of making this conference possible. That only will be possible when we go to high school students who are about to enter college, where their thought process is about to change. If we can change that thought process towards service and need-based economy, I think we can make a difference. So I'm looking for that change in the world at large. And even if I see few people changing and following the thought process, my mission is done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Santi. Professor Brown, your last comments.
You'd expect me as a historian to say something sort of semi-historical, but I think it does help in the general discussions we've had to recognize that our 3 great leaders, Gandhi, Mandela, and King, were all people who were highly skilled at mobilization and at cohering into powerful movements, very diverse people with many interests. But they were not people who had the skills of governance or who could teach the skills of governance. And of course, in the case of Gandhi, he was assassinated before India was even independent. So what I think is important is that in the coming generations after this, after the leaders of nationalist movements, that young people are educated in how government actually works, right from quite a young age, and also that there should be some understanding, if possible, that good government and participation in good administration is an honourable career. The other thing I think is really important is that democracies across the world tend to work well where there is a very strong civil society, where there is a dense civil network of all sorts of interest organizations, whether it's churches or football clubs or mothers' union meetings, where people come together as citizens, they then tend to be able to call to account bad governance.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Brown. You can hand over to my last professor if he wants to make a last contribution. Thank you.
If you want me to contribute, I'll contribute. I don't want to make a contribution per se anyway. In fact, for me, I am Prasad from India. This conference is more like a dream come true for me. I am a dreamer, working to realize those dreams. The earlier dream was the Gandhi King conference at Stanford University. But again, that had another 10 years of constant work, which started with the King conference held at Stanford under the able guidance and leadership of Professor Carson, Dr. Swanti, and many others were there. But then how do we look to have something like that? With Gandhi and King, it has taken us almost 10 years to raise resources and organize that. The last session in that conference was led by, again, Professor Carson. Where do we go from here? I said South Africa. So we are now here in South Africa. And if the question is, where do you go from here? Our next conference will be in England. And we're already in touch with them and we organize. The idea is that the purpose of all these things is how do we network, how do we bring people. What happens by these conferences? It gives enormous hope for people who are working at the grassroots level. They think that I am not alone. Yes. People with this kind of similar thinking are so many around the world. And many, many people like Professor Carson who are giving us the leadership, guidance, and the intellectual, philosophical support. And I would like to tell you here that we brought a delegation from India for this conference of 50 people. 50 people have come from India to participate in this conference. And that is not enough to say, but each one represents one major Gandhian organization in India. And when we are talking about the networking opportunity, I in fact request Professor Carson to visit India, and then in fact I would like to arrange a tour of Professor Carson all to the institutions around. So this networking, this coming together, this confidence building, because what is happening is when I'm working alone, battery discharges. I am not so strong. I'm not a Gandhi where your self is a generation of power. I don't have that. And that battery which I have, it gradually discharges. When I meet people like this in the conference, I again gain strength in the battery to work further when I go back to my country. So conferences do have this kind of purposes. Some people brush it aside as if it is a talking places. No, it is not a talking place. For people who have limited understanding, it may be a talking place for them. But it is like a pilgrimage when we come to Pietermaritzburg, to South Africa. Yes. It is a pilgrimage for us. And there is no Gandhi without South Africa. So we come to South Africa as pilgrims to derive strength, to derive inspiration. So my humble suggestion is that I was telling David Gengen and also Professor Dr. Sriram Santi that we should now start working right from now to make the next conference kind of a thing a reality. And I've got at least 4 offers to host this kind of a conference back in India. At 4 venues we can do that. So if we all of us come together, because I would like to tell you that good people in this world are in the majority. We are good people, we are in the majority. But we are scattered. We are not organized. Selfish people are very small in number, but they are so powerfully organized. They are organized in political parties, in governments, in corporates. They determine, like just now, our friends were saying that I think there are 4 trillionaires who control something like 2% of the world's whole wealth. This is what happens. So it is necessary for the good people to come together. When Carson talks again and again about networking, that is the importance of networking, because always I am happy looking at my organization, looking at what I am doing, I am satisfied. It is not that. When I see your organization, when I derive strength and happiness from your organization, I see myself in your organization. Like what Gandhi said, see yourself in others. If that happens, then we become a larger force. And whatever negative things are happening, we have to say no to them. We are not a minority, but we are a majority, but we are not organized. Now we have to organize ourselves under the leadership of Ila Gandhi, Professor Carson, Dr. Sriram Santi. All of us have to come together under this kind of leadership and create a better world, a peaceful world, and a just world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we really thank the delegation from India. So we really, really thank you very, very much. I just want to echo the sentiments shared by David in that as many of you are coming from universities, we normally receive funding from our government, and our government expects us to publish. So we invite papers to be submitted, and there is a date, which is the 15th of July, for your finalized papers to be submitted so that they will be published in the journal, which is called Alternation, and Professor Janus Smith is the chief editor of that journal. We work together with Professor Denzel Chetty. I don't see Denzel, I don't know where he is now. But we will be expecting your papers, and so that like we do the publications, but at the same time, the call for these communities of practice that we are developing to do the groundwork in our communities, they need to continue the excellent work that they do there. So may I
Thank you.
May I take this opportunity to hand now back, thank the panel, thank the chairs, thank you very much for your reports and the resolutions, and now call David to do the vote of thanks and also close officially.
No, I wanted to make a point, but anyway.
Okay, you can do both. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, colleagues. Let me release you now. A big round of applause to all of them.
So you've got the notes, right? We will then develop this into resolutions and that we'll publish to everybody. Okay, the point I wanted to make is that in respect of education, I think one of the issues is that the issues around education that was raised by not just the Youth Symposium, but also panels today, in the last 2 days. I wanted to raise the issue of the capacity in order to make that change. And I'm saying that the institutions like academic institutions like this one have got the capacity to take the lead in that process, because you've got the resources. So I want to suggest, I want to ask a question first, perhaps. How relevant, for example, is the research that is being done at this institution to the needs of the community? We've got all of these masters and doctoral theses and so on. How relevant are those things to really change, bring about change where the people live? You know, and I think it's a very important question. I don't know how to, perhaps I've got an answer for it, but I think that is a conversation that we need to have. You know, I mean, I did a master's degree in this new bus system in order to eradicate this whole issue of taxis and the way they operate and so on. Okay, it's lying in your library, collecting dust. You know what I'm saying to you? And so that's a question I'm raising, that this thing has to be, you know, at least a percentage of the research has to be around what the community needs, you know, so that we can hand the community something to say, this is what we research, let's see if we can get the resources to do it, you know. So I just wanted to make that point, sorry. Okay, so the way we're going to go with this, with the resolutions is that the Prof has taken down the notes in terms of, and it's being recorded also, in terms of the responses from the roundtables. We will put that into a readable form in terms of resolutions, in terms of the language and so on, and we will circulate it to, firstly, this grouping that is here, as well as the chairs that were here, and to knock it up into a format that we can then circulate to everybody. But I think the critical issue is, from those resolutions, a series of actions that we're going to be implementing. And I think that is where the input from the keynote speakers and others is going to be crucial. So I think that is the format. The way I understand it in terms of the papers is that the papers will be published by the end of this year, early 2024, in a format. I don't think it's going to be in that magazine that you're talking about, but yes, I think yes, there's going to be a book, and I think that the submissions for the book are going to be the end of July, according to the Prof, right? So those of you that have presented papers, you have the time to knock the thing into a format that can be published. Sorry, you want to ask a question? I'm rounding up. You got your hand up. I don't know. Can we just have a mic? Yeah, I think we neglected to put this thing open to the House. Sorry.
Violence against the LGBTI people
Yes.
should have been among the resolutions.
Yes, I think we had a session on that. We had a roundtable on that, and I hope that a resolution came out of that one, specifically addressing the issue that was raised now. Okay, so colleagues, I think, yes. Only because you're from Mexico. I'm kidding. I've got one here.
Hello. Okay. I would like to propose to the organizing committee, if you are agree, to work with my university or with our network in Latin America to help the resolution to translate in Spanish to start to involve the region in this kind of in this conversation and in this conference. I will be. If you're
no, thank you for that offer. I think we've recorded that and we've got your details. I think, colleagues, the critical issue that has come through from all of this thing is the need for networking, right? And Professor Carson and Dr. Mack has given us a platform, and I think that perhaps we must find a way then. Dr. Johnny Mack is actually the chair of that particular session platform, to see how we can include and broaden this thing as wide as we can. And I think that under that network, there are various subcommittees that deal with all of these things, education and so on. And so it's a wonderful way of connecting to people that are involved on the ground and contribute to the discussions there and the formulation of plans going forward. Like, for example, I mean, peace education is something that has started in South Africa, but it's not as extensive and intensive, stand to correction, as it is happening in the US in terms of courses and other things. Like Dr. Carson is running a thing on a Monday, for example, for students. That's actual training on the ground, in a sense. And I think that's something that we need here in South Africa to pursue. We got a hand up. Can I suggest, colleagues, if it's a resolution that you want to propose outside of what has been discussed, please do that. If it's a repetition, I'm asking please not to mention it. So if it's not covered, that's fine. We can consider it. We didn't have time to actually open this thing up to everybody. Yes, Ruth. No, I understand that. Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you very much. In fact, there's another point I want to make in the same vein. But let's give the gentleman an opportunity.
Yes, thank you. There is a suggestion that I would like to make, because some colleagues wanted to contribute papers regarding that, the theme here. The question is, it allowed that even those who have not presented here, can they be in a position to contribute more papers where some areas are not captured?
No, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. In fact, there have been a number of abstracts that came in too late, and I think everybody has got a response to say, even though you're not part of the conference, because we couldn't do it at that late stage, to include it in the conference program itself. But I think that's an opportunity. The answer is yes.
Okay. Just to give each and every one of us something to think about as we are going back to our respective countries and our homes. Are we just providing lip service that is not commensurate with our actions? Because my whole thing is the working class, middle working class, and the affluent in our societies willing to relinquish the benefits that emanate from this lopsided evil system that is oppressing our people? Because
can I interrupt you for a while, right? I'm going to interrupt you. I'll tell you why. This is not the part of the conference to have a discussion. If you want to formulate that into a resolution, please do that. I'll give you a minute, think about it, and put a resolution forward for the House, and we will include that. But there's no time to discuss anything now. We are rounding up, right?
As I was saying, shouldn't our focus be to like the non-participation in this system? Because if you want to shake the pillars of education, then you shouldn't participate in education. And if you want to shake the pillars of the economic system, then you should withdraw economic support. So my worry is we're going to be having conferences in the future of this nature without actually reaping the fruits of our meeting. Because if we continue to participate in the system, if we have 10 people protesting and the rest of the other people are actually at work participating in the same system that is oppressing those 10 people, because this conference has been rife with statements such as love thy neighbor as you love yourself. Isn't loving your neighbor as yourself not willing to go to bed on a full stomach when your neighbor is actually going to bed on an empty stomach?
I'm going to interrupt you, right?
So,
I'm the chairman. I'm going to interrupt you. This is not a place to make that kind of comment. I'm saying formulate that into a resolution, and then we will include that in a resolution. So we're not averse to adding resolutions from the floor, but you can't make a statement now, just as a statement. We've just gone through this discussion. We've got resolutions that we think kind of covers everything that we say. If you think we haven't covered something, like the one that you mentioned now, just write it. I mean, I'm telling you that we'll take it. That's all I'm saying, but we can't make a speech now.
okay.
Yeah.
I was
Okay,
just
thank you.
giving everybody something to think about.
No. That should have been in the other session. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Chairman. Perhaps my just 2%. Chairman, we'd like to thank the opportunity as the young people to speak. The youth conference was largely appreciated. However, Chairman, I think young people should have given an opportunity to opine for themselves, and that platform was not opened for them. Here's a thorny question. Is everybody who is in solidarity with the poor people and the struggle of poor people, are they willing to commit class suicide? Think about it, then get back to me if time permits.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so colleagues, we now, I think we have a plan of how to deal with this thing. So I'm going to repeat, okay, that Prof. Dubushle has written down and recorded, and we got it on tape anyway, all of the discussion that has happened during this session of the resolutions and the feedback. We will put that into a readable kind of form. Resolutions have got to be written in a particular way. And then we will circulate that for comment to the people that have been involved with this, the chairpersons and so on. Thereafter, we will then make this available to everybody in terms of resolutions from here. And I think that the question of networking then is something that we need to really address. And we've got the chairperson of that network, the one network, there are other networks too, to say how we can deal with the issue of broadening that network and dealing with some of these issues that have been raised here. Okay, so with those few words, let me on behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, the School of Humanities in particular, and Professor Yanni Smith, who's been involved in the organization of this conference from the beginning, let me, on behalf of that unit at the university and the Peter Marisburg Gandhi Foundation, who've been responsible for all of the logistics for this conference, extend a warm thank you to all of you that have contributed in some way to this conference. As a delegate, as somebody that came in, as a speaker, as a chairperson, as an organizer, as a volunteer, as a funder, everybody in that actually made this conference a success. And I think it was a success from the comments that I've heard from people. So I want to thank you. And I made one observation, and I think that the university needs to perhaps note this. When we have discussions, conferences like this, we cannot put so many speakers in one kind of session. And that is why I think one of the chairpersons said that there was no time for discussion. So I think when we're formulating the program, we must ensure that we give enough time for speakers to articulate their views and also for discussion. We've had wonderful plenaries in this venue, but we did not have an opportunity for the delegates to interact with that and to ask questions. So I think it's a lesson that we need to learn as we're going forward. Colleagues, I need to thank this team that has been here from the ICS, I think you were called, headed by Selvin Tintin. They've done a sterling job in trying to control everything. There are 6 venues that we've been using, and they've had teams in each of these venues. There have been some hiccups, like as usual, but they've been able to sort it out, and I want to thank them also for the work that they've done. They've been dealing with live streaming, recordings, and all that kind of stuff, as well as these in-person things, and it's a wonderful thing to have a team like this in a conference like this. I want to thank you for that. And finally, I want to thank 2 people in particular that have been at the center of the administration of this conference. And your delegates will know these names. Firstly, from the university, we have Mrs. Karan Suter, who's been the academic administrator for this conference. I don't see her here. She must be organizing something as usual. But really, she's been interacting with you. She's taken some of the flack from the speakers and so on in terms of abstracts and all of that. But I think she's kept that going, and so I want to extend a special thank you to her. And also to Cynthia Stevens, who's the administrator from the logistics side of the conference, for the work that she has done also in order to bring this thing together. It's been an enormous task. We've been meeting from last year sometime. I want to finally thank this organizing team. And I'm going to mention them by name. Professor Claiborne Carson, Dr. Ela Gandhi, Razia Saleh from the foundation, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Dr. Sriram Sonti from the Chicago Foundation, Professor Prasad Golanpalli from the Gandhi King Institute in India, Professor Yanni Smith, who's represented the university, and of course I chair those sessions, so don't clap. But it's been a tremendous road that we've come through, and I think that before we get to the next conference, I'm sorry, Professor Prasad, but before we get to the next conference, we must have something on the ground that really needs attention in terms of action before. So when we get to the next conference, we need to ask the question, where did we come from? You know, not where are we going? Where have we come from? What have we done? And I think that Dr. Carson has mentioned this, that one of the key issues that includes all of these things that we've discussed is the issue of human rights. And I think that all of the issues, the conflict, the poverty, and everything that is happening around the world, the center is human rights. And so we must find a strategy and a way of addressing human rights through any means that we possibly can. I mean, we know that the United Nations, the African Union, has not been as effective as they should be when it comes to human rights around the world. And so through our action before the next conference, we need to challenge these organizations and assist in trying to improve the whole issue of human rights. So colleagues, with those few words, thank you very much. Good night. And we will see you next time. We don't know where.